At the time that this happened, I was a 13-year-old female. So, this happened 2 years ago, and I was fairly naive. I was a major introvert, only friends with a few people in my class. I wanted to be social, but I preferred to be alone and to read or write. Classic nerd things. In early November, I got a text from my phone that was from a few classmates, whose phone numbers I had and around one or two I couldn't recognize. It was a group chat, asking if we wanted to hang out at night near a park by our school. My parents, being strict and paranoid, would never let me go. Luckily, or what I thought was luck, they were heading out for an overnight trip. They would be back at around 4 in the morning, so everything fell into place. Once my parents left around 8, I ran out the door and made my way to the park. The one thing that I made sure to do was lock the door to the house. My parents were paranoid after all, and it was the biggest thing that they had engraved into me. Once I arrived at the park, I noticed a creepy figure near the edge of the woods. No one else seemed to notice it, and I already had enough reputation as a weirdo who was true crime obsessed, so I didn't mention it. The night drew on and on. I was having the time of my life, ignoring the gut feeling that I had telling me to run. Every so often, I would look over my shoulder and the man would still be standing there. Around 9:45, 4 out of the 10 people there had to leave due to curfew. It was getting cold and it was nearly pitch black with a few streetlights every so often. The rest of us decided to go as well, since it felt more eerie and quiet. The place that we were hanging out at was a field that was fenced in with a few exits and entrances. A large, wide field with a small park in the back and our giant middle school behind us. The front of the field faced the empty road and the right and left sides were surrounded by forest. All of the people left were getting picked up by cars, meaning that they went the opposite way of the road, since that's where the parking lot was. The man stood by the right forest road exit that I needed to take to get home. I walked away from my group, and I tried to steady my heavy breathing. I didn't want to be paranoid, but all the true crime that I listened to was catching up to me. The man was probably early 40s, late 30s, dark hair with a beard, probably around 5'9", but at the time it seemed like he was over 6 foot. He stood about 10 feet from the exit that I had to take, so when I got close enough to it, I ran for about 30 feet through the exit and through the woods. Once I felt safe enough, I started to just quickly walk through the woods instead, or at least to get to the road. I heard a snap and a crunch from behind me. I stopped walking for a second and quickly checked over my shoulder. Around 15 feet behind me stood the very same man. He was walking slowly behind me, almost as if he was trying not to be suspicious, but it only made my fear grow. I turned around and walked so quickly that I was basically jogging. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park that we had hung out at, and I wasn't athletic enough to run home. After around 7 minutes of walking fast, I was in my neighborhood. I knew that I could run to my house if I had to, so I checked to see if he was trailing behind me. And to my horror, he was only about 5 feet away now. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I could hear his footsteps behind me thumping across the concrete as he ran too. I dove down an alleyway that I knew well and tried to lose him in a park, making my way home even longer. I could hear his heavy breath followed by his footsteps as he tried to keep up. I cut through houses, backyards, and front yards. I finally made it to my house and I flew up the steps. I looked behind me and he had just arrived at the bottom of my stairs. I unlocked the door and I burst through it. shoving it close behind me, and I heard him hit the door with his whole body. I ran around the house and locked all the windows, turned off the lights and hid in my bedroom with a kitchen knife, just in case he got in. He didn't, luckily. If this was a better world, that's where my story would end, but it doesn't. After a few months, I haven't really told anyone what's happened since I don't want to get in trouble with my parents for sneaking out or anything. I didn't go out with anyone or any group anymore, and my loner status returned. I began to write horror stories as a coping mechanism, and I never went out past 7 p.m. It was around February when a classmate of mine was sharing a story of some random man following her home on a bus. She described him almost the exact same as the man who had chased me home. Another girl mentioned that he sounded like the guy who stood outside the school and tried to follow her home. I didn't join in, but everyone agreed that he was just a weird guy. He was kind of forgotten, and eventually I moved on too. Around May, I was getting ready to walk to school when my mom pulled me aside and showed me a picture of the man. The guy who had stalked me, actually. She told me that he had been arrested 2 weeks ago for doing many of the same things that he had done to me, but he had escaped last night. She told me to keep an eye out for him and to call the cops if I saw him. I was shaking the whole time that I made my way to school. It haunts me to know that if he had caught me, something really bad would have happened. This happened to me and my then girlfriend in the summer of 2004. I need to provide a bit of context first though, so the context will be the first little bit. My hometown was decimated by flooding from Hurricane Floyd in 1999. Part of the response and recovery efforts involved FEMA setting up RVs as temporary housing for those whose homes were either destroyed or heavily damaged. These RVs were set up in previously vacant fields outside of town. The park was dismantled by 2001 or so. They put up fencing around the perimeter and trenched over the other streets into the area to keep people out. But they forgot one entrance or left it purposely, just for emergency vehicles to have access. Some friends of mine had found this entrance and we frequently would use the area as our playground. We would go back there to set off fireworks, turn the streets into a race course, or to have some fun with our girlfriends. To set the stage of how this place looks, there were 3 streets running east to west in orientation, a street that went around the other streets in an oval fashion. The grass was very overgrown and about 4 feet high. The south and north side of the area were wooded. The east side had large dirt berms that were about 20 feet high, and had been placed there when the street was graded in '99. They normally provided a climbing challenge for RS. Notice. This particular day, my girlfriend and I were parked on one of the east-west streets amongst the tall grass to remain hidden. We were undressing to get it on in the backseat of the car, and as we began, I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. He's wearing denim overalls, and in his left hand is a full-size axe. A wave of fear washed over me, and I yelled out, "Oh my God!" My girlfriend popped up to look out the back windshield and let out a scream and, "What are we going to do?" I frantically start looking for the car keys. There's a pile of clothes on the floorboard and I can't find them. I look at the back and he's getting closer. I can see his face now and it's emotionless with a blank stare. I start grabbing clothes and shaking them to hopefully find the keys. They pop loose and fall to the floor. I grab them and immediately jump into the driver's seat, still completely naked. I start the car and from the back seat, my still naked girlfriend screams, "Go!" I look in the rearview mirror as I'm putting the car into drive and he's now within about 50 to 60 feet of it. Same blank look but staring at the car with the axe still in hand. I didn't even fasten my seatbelt, and I'm still fully nude as I floored the gas, kicking up rocks everywhere as the tires spun as I sped away from this man holding the axe. We got up out of the abandoned FEMA park as quickly as we could drive the car without crashing. My girlfriend was hysterical the whole time, until we got back to the main road and we were safe. We stopped about a mile up the road on the side of the road to put our clothes back on and to unwind. I don't know where this man came from, as there are no houses within a mile or so of the old FEMA site, but it seemed like he came out of nowhere. I also didn't see any other cars at the site, as I had done a lap around the park before we chose our spot to park. I'm not sure what his intentions were, as he never said anything to us, and I know he saw us panicking in the car. Whatever his intentions actually were, I know they weren't good. The look on his face and the axe in his hand made that abundantly clear. I went back with a few friends a few days later and found no place this guy could have been lurking, and there were no signs that anyone had been camping there. To this day, it's one of the scariest events that I've ever been through. I don't even know how to begin this. To be honest, I was only able to puzzle what happened a few months ago. I guess I'll start from where I believe is the beginning, but I can assure you it was the first time that I saw him. I'll keep the details pretty vague regarding where this happened, as to not dox myself. I know that I had pictures of my face on Reddit, but I don't feel comfortable sharing my name or the specific city that I lived in at the time. Let's just say that it is a European city, very central and cosmopolitan. When I was about 15, I was extremely interested in philosophy books. I didn't feel like I could talk to my friends about the subject without boring them. So when this man approached me on the street with a pamphlet about Plato classes, I was pretty excited. He was about 28 to 30 at the time, very tall and skinny, and he had crazy eyes. I remember that I was a smarty and thought that reading two of his most well-known books made me interesting, so we started debating. It was a nice conversation and it lasted about only 10 minutes, but it was getting late, so I left it at that. He told me his name, but I honestly can't remember it. A couple of days after, I found him on the same street, at a totally different time. It was always very crowded, so I wasn't really spooked out about it. I was getting out of the subway after classes. Mind you, I took this route every day until I graduated high school. I didn't live on that street, but that's where I got out of the subway and then waited for the bus that would get me home. I thought it was a cool coincidence that the philosophy guy was at the subway door. This time he didn't have any pamphlets. He had a lollipop in his hand, and I know it sounds cliche, but it was so eerie to see a 6-foot guy just sucking his lollipop and looking straight at me. He said hi and I said hi back. He tried to get the conversation going, but I could feel this weird energy in the air, so I decided to cut the conversation short. I would see him once or twice a week, and I just assumed he lived there and happened to be going for a walk at the same time as I was getting home. I honestly believe this weird guy twice my age just happened to find his way to me so many times. That is until I saw him in my neighborhood. I was having coffee with a friend and she was telling me that she met this cool guy while playing volleyball on the beach, when the guy, I kid you not, had just appeared out of nowhere. He approached my friend and they talked for a bit. Yeah, he was the guy that she was just talking about. He seemed mildly surprised that we were friends, but didn't give it much thought, so I didn't either. When he left, I started feeling uneasy, but my friend thought that he was cool, so I didn't voice my concerns. There's this thing about teenage girls that makes them think that they're very mature for their age. So we just assumed that he had befriended us separately, and then found out that we were friends. At the time, none of us had social media, apart from WhatsApp, so I still can't understand how he managed to insert himself in my friend group. Eventually, my friend left to study abroad and the subject had died. I would see the dude now and then on the same street of my commute, but we could only speak for a few minutes and that was it. This went on for about 6 months. Sometimes he would pretend he didn't know who I was but would still approach me saying that I looked familiar. Sometimes he would greet me very warmly. Looking back, I guess he was dealing with some kind of mental health problem. Slowly, he was getting bolder. One time, he asked for my number and tried to hug me. I could feel that something was very wrong, but at the same time, I thought that I was being the weird one and he was just a nice dude. But still, I gave him a fake number. This other time, we went to a church on a school trip and he was waiting outside, talking to my peers. He played it cool, saying that he had seen my face somewhere but was not sure, as if I hadn't been seeing him almost every week for a year now. I was very stupid. I never thought about talking to my parents about this. After all, the guy wasn't violent. He wasn't mean. In my head, he was just a lonely man who happened to have a strangely similar routine. I started to be scared though. I would look behind my back when I was alone at night. I would avoid dark streets. I was kind of paranoid, but still, I ignored my gut feeling and shoved it in the back of my mind. After all, as long as I gave him a few minutes of my day when he called out for me, everything would be fine. When I turned 17, I stopped seeing him, and I think this went on for about a year. It was a relief, honestly. I could sense that what had happened was bizarre, but I had explained it to my friends like it was funny, like it was a joke. Eventually, I started attending college, so my everyday route changed. I stayed in the same city though. One day, I had to go through that same street again. I can't remember why. I just know that I was walking, minding my own business. It was maybe 9 p.m. And then I turned around the corner and there he was. He saw me, smiled, and said that he was lost. He asked for directions. And I swear to God I felt primal fear at that moment. I felt that I was dealing with a truly insane person, because we had crossed each other's paths for 2 years straight, in this exact same place. He was acting as if he didn't know me, or the intersection. Something about that messed with my mind for a while. I just kept walking. I didn't look at him, didn't utter a single word. And then he completely lost his mind. For the first time, I saw what he really was. He tried to grab hold of my arm and scream that I was the biggest bee ever. He said that he hoped my mom would pass away from cancer. He said that he would kill me. I know that I was not alone, as there was still quite a lot of people outside, but no one said anything. He just kept screaming his lungs out, and I just started running. I ran and I cried. That was the last time that I ever saw him, 2 years ago. He has long since stopped talking to my friend. No one knows who he is. I can't remember a name to go to the police and file a report either. It's like my mind tried to erase him. He was a stellar stalker though, because I understood that's what he was years after the fact. I'm just grateful that I'm safe.